Hello, good day. Welcome back to the Speaking of Tea podcast. You're with your host, Rachelle, and today you're in for a special episode where I'm going to be speaking about one of my greatest passions, poetry. I'm going to read some poetry, definitely, but I also just want to talk about poetry itself. What makes poetry what it is? What makes any poem a poem besides just some verse or a paragraph or a story or an essay? Because descriptive words need to be in all of these different forms in order to convey what it is that you want to convey. So, what makes a poem a poem? Is it fancier words? Is it rhyming structure? Is it some words that just kind of sound good together? Well, there's a whole bunch of different literary uses that we can choose to use. Sorry, I stumbled there because I didn't want to say uses and use. As a poet, I really don't like to have the same word in two sentences side by side or within the same sentence. I'm very firm and serious about that. I tried to edit in my head out loud. That's why I stumbled, and it doesn't really work. So, when writing a poem, to that point of editing, when it comes to producing a good poem, it's so important to also edit your poem because you might write something with a lot of good lines and it might feel like it's perfect, but you might decide that it's not quite right. And that's perfectly fine. So many great poems are not just produced out of thin air and arrive on the page with every word the way it's meant to be forever. Your favorite bands didn't release albums with lyrics that they just wrote at the top of their heads. They went through and edited. They made choices. Some lines that were probably perfect in a poem format didn't actually work as lyrics because of the timing and the tempo. So some words sometimes have to get omitted in order to emotionally express what it is that you want to express. Because not everything just works. We are the champions, my friends, and we'll keep on fighting till the end. So you may have written it and we'll keep fighting until the end. We'll keep on fighting until the end. Well, we really just hear the till, right? So just even little things like that to make sure a poem or lyrics work. So when you're doing more spoken word things too, or your poems are sometimes they're written just to be read. Other poems are written to be read and to be expressed, and others are more spoken word, really meant for the performance style. As far as what I'm just deciding off the top of my head, I mean, there's really no rules. There's rules and there are not rules when it comes to poetry, and that's part of what makes it so flexible and dynamic and diverse. Poetry doesn't really have a specific quality that makes it a poem, but there is at the same time. I know I'm talking in circles here. but poetry is used to express certain emotions and certain feelings. When I write poetry, I like to try to preserve something that I'm feeling in the moment about something. So, example, I've actually been inspired by a lot of different songs or even TV shows, and I want to capture the vibe as some kind of like a summary or some element philosophically that I see out of the experience of that show. I like to try to find some different words. Sometimes use words that are from the shows themselves to, honor it, or just because it's reflecting what I'm seeing, right? So, but I really like to try to capture what I'm seeing there. It's actually a fun almost practice, even just like poetry practice, to take what I'm seeing and then try to reproduce something out of it. And if I feel like it matches and I feel like I've achieved it, then I have something to actually like base it off of too. Or if I read it to somebody and they're like, "Oh, yeah, yeah, that made sense." Woo! Okay, score for me. Okay, so to that, I'll have an example here. If you've ever watched the show The OA, I like this one. All right, this one I actually end up calling Untitled. Death or blindness. Unknown, where the mind might land once projected. Terror, thrust into the endless air, body frozen. Resist, images spitting into kaleidoscope's shifting form. Release, in search of a landing point. Total immersion. I breathe. With what? Eyes. Total immersion in search of a landing point. Release. Shifting form, images spitting into kaleidoscope's resist. Body frozen, thrust into the endless air. Once projected where the mind might land. Unknown. Vision or freedom. I'm going to have a little sip of tea. Which has gotten cold because I've been talking too long. Terrible. Okay. So if you've seen that show, I really quite like it. So basically you start off with this woman who has been blind like forever, most of her life, since she was like 5 years old. And this was due to a near-death experience. So I guess what I really based this poem on was like going into the second season of it. We see her and her friends basically dimension hopping. And then so it's like their consciousness leaves their current bodies and hops into new bodies in this other dimension. New bodies, well, being their own, but without having ever had those lived experiences. So they are kind of two people, or their consciousness might take over the original one, but then they have no record of like the previous life that has been lived inside of that body. So I just find that such a really interesting concept. So anyway, in the idea of this voidal place where that consciousness actually exists, looking for where they're going to land, and hopefully they all land in the same place together, because that was the mission. So unknown, where the mind might land once projected, leaving the body. Terror, thrust into the endless air, body frozen. So, it's all these. Okay, so thrust. Let me go back to the line before I go far. Endless air, like you don't know how long, where you are, how long it's going to end up being. How long is long? What is time when you're in this kind of void? It might feel like forever. It might be a few seconds. We resist, images spitting into kaleidoscope's shifting form. So just the idea that maybe everything you're seeing just becomes so feathered out and so fractaled out. Because like nothing is going to be straight and clear anymore. Or I don't know. I don't know what it's like to be in that state of mind. It's just my imagining. But the idea of fractals is how do I say? It's sort of like a part of the theory of how everything blooms outwards from a singular point, sacred geometry, flower of life kind of thing. The flower of life starts with the seed of life, and then you get an external petals that become other word I forget, and then another layer of it becomes the flower of life. But it's all fractaling out from the same core shape, and then blooms outwards. And then the idea of shifting form, maybe the consciousness is shifting form. I don't know. We can see that in a few different ways. Release in search of a landing point, total immersion. So releasing from this kind of voidal plane and searching for where you're going to end up. Maybe they don't actually get to search. I mean, you just land, but then total immersion, you become fully immersed in part of it. And then for the second half of the poem, I actually just did all of the lines backwards. I just thought that was a fun way to play with the idea of the kaleidoscopes and the sort of coming from somewhere but going back to the beginning. There's this sort of full circle element that I played with this. Vision or freedom to end it off. Because the idea of when the main character, she gets her vision back when she had another near-death experience. And there is an idea of freedom with that. But I mean, I'm not giving that much away if I'm telling you she gets kidnapped in the show. The story is about her retelling that story about it. So when she was blind and kidnapped, she was, able to do a certain amount of things. And then when she had a near-death experience, she had her vision come back. And for a certain amount of time, she was able to hide it from her kidnapper. So that offered her a certain amount of freedom. But she almost had more freedom because she was more trusted when she was blind, because the person thought that she just had so much more disability with it. So is it freedom to have her vision back when she already lived her whole life without it? So what makes that a poem? I just gave you like the full spoken like breakdown of it. This wasn't paragraphs, whatever. It was just explaining story lecture, right? So I basically gave you a lecture on a poem. Sorry. And so that was me going into a lot of detail about different elements of a show and describing it. But all of these words that I chose to make up a poem, I just broke down a whole bunch of different elements that felt creatively like they worked together to tell a tale in a way to let your imagination explore it, instead of just giving you all of the information straight up. So, I mean, someone who reads this probably wouldn't. I mean, I'm not really giving that many hints or clues about what show this came from. Even me telling you might help you, to relate it to the show if you were to watch it. But it was just a fun thing for me to try to write and achieve, to make something have a certain amount of meaning and emotion. Then, yeah. I don't remember where I started with that idea. So anyway. But that's what makes me feel like it's a poem and not any kind of other thing. Okay, here's another couple of them. I'm reading right now out of my Emptiness of the Way book. Had quite a few inspirations there. Watching some TV shows. Yeah, anyway. So this one is called Untying the Knot. An endless loop. The cycle of suffering will always continue until we find the source of suffering. When catastrophes of the past resurface like the wrecking ball of repression smashing open, it is time to reanalyze, redefine what it is we truly desire. Imagine if everything were a blank slate. No heroes, no villains, no friends, no enemies. Everything you've ever known wiped out. The thread that tied this knot of infinity snipped. The fates finally have their way. Let's accept our cause and effect. To go back in time and save one soul? What about the lessons we learn once they've gone? Would I be able to handle the truth when somebody says, I am you? When we start to mess with time, how many timelines get created? Which one is real? How can any be fake? What do we want to control? Will anybody agree on anything? Untie the knot, bring it to an end. When the cycle ceases, so does the suffering. Everything erased. The end comes before the beginning. We pierce into the void, the home of enlightenment. the place where we belong. So I designed that one off of the show Dark. It's a German show about time travel in this small town. Um, how much can I say without it revealing too much plot? Yeah, I don't want to go deep into this one because there's just so much that you get to discover when you watch the show. So pretty much that poem is just a teaser for you to go and see that show. There's like 4 seasons? I don't know. But it's a fantastic ride, and it has a whole bunch of philosophy involved and things about time travel and time loops, and kind of what happens when you mess with time and who belongs when. A lot of interesting queries in that one. So yeah, so I mean, a poem. In this one, I have a set of stanzas. I have different themes that I'm working with. We're talking about the idea of the source of suffering, and catastrophes of the past resurface like the wrecking ball of repression smashing open. What is it? What's everything that we keep inside of ourselves? Repression. When I first heard the word repression, I just identified that as probably the worst thing you can do to yourself. And as time has gone on, I've really seen how that's pretty much true. When you repress something, you're shoving it into the back of your mind. Something that needs to be repressed, or that you feel like you need to repress, and that's for emotional safety, and it's it's fine for a certain amount of time, but you can't completely repress something because it's just going to come back. That's just what the mind does. If it's being repressed, it's going to come back. If it has been resolved and healed and forgiven, it might come back, but it comes back with more love and acceptance, and it doesn't try to kill you. Repression basically just wants to eat you from the inside out. In the show, there's just elements of things that just come smashing over me. The person bursts into smithereens. Not really, but emotionally, because something that they thought was buried is coming back. And the ideas of is everything fate, or is everything, what's the word for it? Predetermined. Is everything predetermined or fate, or do we have free will? This is constantly explored. So that's also what I address in this poem. And then the ideas surrounding time travel, which I've liked to play with, and I've really been inspired by Alisanna's Annabelle trilogy, that they really explore the idea of time travel, and what their main character Annabelle goes through inside the Tesseract, and the idea of time loops, or how her consciousness can be split off into a few different characters that are all essentially her, but they're not her when she becomes in a different form, in different experiences, and they don't all come back together. It's just a split. It's I don't know if that's what chaos theory is, but sorry. Boom. So when we start to mess with time, how many timelines can get created? If for example you go back in time, right, you start to make decisions, and then when a decision is made, then a new sort of timeline of existence comes from that. And every choice that you make, you may have heard the theory that every choice that you make becomes a reality. And any choice you didn't make, perhaps you did end up making it in some way, and that has also become a reality, but you're not experiencing that reality. There, like in this idea, there's infinite dimensions. If I chose to read this poem right now, or I chose to read this poem right now, but I could have chosen any other poem in this book to read and record into this podcast today, but I didn't. But there could be another reality where I chose to read the next poem in the book, Montaged Feelings. I could be reading that first right now, and that might not really affect reality all that much. But there is a timeline, because I've imagined it. There's a timeline out there that I have started off with reading that one. And what kind of effect would that have? It would change the scope of my delivery and what conversation I'm trying to start having. And then that blooms outwards, because by the time it reaches your ears, how are you going to be affected? Maybe you really liked what I'm talking about here with Untying the Knot, this poem first. And maybe you would have actually just gotten bored listening to me talking about that next poem. And then you could have shut this off and gone on and on. Maybe this is saving your life because you are just so interested and you are sitting down, listening carefully, not moving, because you could have stood up and dropped your cup of tea, and then that cup would shatter on the ground, and it would be a great tragedy. Instead, you're sitting comfortably, listening, holding your cup close to you, enjoying it in its form, unbroken and pure. You never know. I'm gonna have some tea now. And then I'm just going to narrate what I'm doing as I'm doing it, because I'm on the microphone. It's fun, very fun. Okay, so I'm having some Kamairicha, Japanese green tea. It's delicious. It's very, very nice umami and kind of got a sweetness, grass, vegetable. It's just so nice. So I'm making that in my Kyushu style teapot. It's a clay teapot, and it has like this side handle, so it has an interesting kind of pouring method. You're holding the side handle, and then you're tilting it kind of forward, I guess. Anyway, it's really cute, and I'm using this nice little tea filter from Anthea Tea House in Portland, and it's it's this filter that is made of a leaf and just encased with a wooden frame, and it catches just the little bits of tea leaves that come out of the pot as I'm pouring it. So it's this nice. It's kind of like having a strainer in your teapot or teacup to keep the leaves. But since it's this just a method where I put the leaves straight into the pot and pour out, sometimes little bits of leaves come out, and really I don't mind eating the leaves, but also it's nice to have a thing to catch the leaves. And then you get a pure, clean cup of no leaf, just liquid. And there's a certain amount of enjoyment from that. Also, this filter is just so awesome. I love how very thin and delicate looking that this leaf looks. But there's just so many tiny little holes in it that are protecting even a lot smaller leaves. And the idea with this thing is that it is light and delicate, but it gets stronger over time the more you're pouring tea over it. I don't know if different minerals of the tea get into the veins of it and strengthen, but I don't know, the tea leaf is a very powerful plant that it strengthens my body, so why doesn't it strengthen the body of a dead leaf? Sorry, I'm the scientist. I'm just a poet. Oh, okay. Now I get to drink this delicious tea. Hmm. When I think of poetry, I don't think about rhyming. This is what my high school English teacher taught me so that I focus more on the words and the message being delivered rather than the rhymes supporting that a certain kind of structure. Um, yeah, because what he taught basically is that you're spending too much time focusing on this rhyme and just to find words to kind of make it work and stuff. And I mean, some people are just brilliant at rhymes, and sometimes I do some rhymes and it does work. But yeah, as a more novice poet, I really appreciated how he taught this. Like, just stay away from the rhyming structure, and then you can really you let your mind explore more, and then it doesn't. When you're reading a poem, you can still give it so much emotion and passion and everything that it needs to be expressed. And the rhyming is just it isn't necessary. I haven't felt like that's been a thing I've needed over time because that's just what I learned. A guide of truth, for example. In the light, I can perceive my work. Teapots, electronics, books, pens. In the dark, I can feel these things. Weight, texture, smell, invisible words. Darkness within darkness, the gateway to all understanding. Somehow sparks fear, I forget. Bring warm liquid to my mouth. Sip, relax, and breathe. She stares and waits. Night butterfly. People don't change across the world. They integrate. Musical tones waver in a chilly eve. Ghosts of notes forgotten, renewed in a constant stream. Laughter of healing pipes out like it was meant to be. Forgo the silent hells of tension. Let it arise for as long as necessary. Breathe. Are you hearing your heart or your throat? Do your lungs breathe air, or does your soul? This body perceives more than our memories. Every guilt, smile, and struggle locked in. Rejoice! For here arrives a night butterfly, cheering you on, transforming you. And returns the source of what you are or are not. Matrix. So there's like in a little area, I think I end up rhyming what I said. Be and necessary. I think that was it. So, but that one, it feels like a whole poem. It was so expressive, and I think I just have my own developed kind of sense of pace and movement and rhythm in how I deliver poems, and I think I probably like trail off at the end of a line. I don't know. Sorry. I can't replicate myself when I'm not just doing it. But it didn't need rhyming in order to achieve the meaning that it was. This poem, for example, it was me sitting with some friends. We were around the fire. I think we had a fire going. And my friend was giving some healing to a girl, like energy healing stuff, while another friend was playing the handpan. And so I'm just listening there, observing all of the different elements between across these three people, and I'm just like taking down little bits of things that I notice are going on, and turned it into a poem as I was sitting there. It was kind of fun. It was like it was like one person is receiving the healing and one person is, facilitating that by playing the music, and then I'm there recording the session essentially. I don't have like a typewriter and not taking down all of the details, but I'm catching the details that matter. That's a fun way that I have enjoyed writing poetry as well, is to just capture the moment. So taking in different elements that I'm seeing or hearing. So you can always go with the senses: taste, touch, smell, sound, vision. Sorry. Forgot. What are the five again? What am I doing right now? Oh, I'm seeing things in the room. Vision. Okay. And then but it's is very important to use descriptive words. Visuals actually are a very important part of poetry. If you can record the things that you are physically seeing and that are visible, if you can draw the picture and immerse your reader or listener into the scene that you are being inspired by, what is it you're seeing you want your reader to see, that's part of what makes a good poem as well. I mean, definitely you can write a great poem about emotional things that you're feeling, and but you still need the concrete grounding of the visuals to really round off what it is you're trying to express, because you can get lost in just describing the things that you're thinking and feeling directly, but it doesn't always work. How do I say? It kind of just like can come off maybe like you're just blurting out to a friend whatever it is that you're thinking about or feeling. So you because I'm not discounting what certain kinds of poems can end up being, but I have actually like written I even wrote a sarcastic poem in my second poetry book. It's called Thoughts, and it says, poetry is not just writing thoughts. That was my own sarcasm, because I felt like I was a bit too much in my head. And in the previous poem was like a 3-part poem that I wrote across different days, but it was sort of like it was an emotional sort of tale about pandemic times and feeling a sense of isolation, a true sense of isolation, like what they wanted us to be feeling, or not feeling, but wanting us to do, is to isolate. And I'm like, okay, well, I do feel pretty isolated lately, and it's due to my choices and this and that, blah blah blah. But then, and then I think I do think that was a great poem. Don't get me wrong. I do really appreciate what I expressed and what I was able to preserve in a time capsule, because I'm never going to go back to that period of time. Let's knock on wood that we never get another pandemic again. As if they just like happen. Like, man, what a crazy time. But then I, after going through that whole journey with that 3-part poem, I look back at myself. I'm like, oh my God. Okay. Let's get back to the like actual poetry here and write visually explorative things. Thank you very much. Like, yeah, I get sarcastic with myself. I'm real kind. Yeah, it's a taste of me that I'm inserting in the books. So it's like how I am, creating a poem, and then how I'm also talking to myself about my own opinions on my own process. I have fun with myself. It's great. Yeah. I don't know, I just glanced at the time of how long this has been going, and it's been a good half an hour, and because I looked at the clock, it kind of disturbed my flow. So I think I'm gonna just kind of end that off there. But I enjoyed the a good moment of just talking about poetry for a while, and hopefully you get something out of the few couple poems that I shared during this, um, and a few more of the stories because that definitely helps people to know a bit more of where I'm coming from and what I've written. Um, hearing the stories behind the poems just gives more depth to the poems themselves. So I didn't need to tell you that. Obviously, you know that. You're probably seeking the stories. Okay. Anyway, all right, I'm gonna sign off here, but just to note again, that's out of my most recent book, the third book of my poetry trilogy, Emptiness of the Way. Um, if you want copies of it, you can find it from me on my website, mechatpoet.com. Yeah. Okay. So have a lovely day and maybe write a poem this week. Okay. Goodbye.